The transport shuttle hummed quietly as it descended through the atmosphere of Kepler 442b, carrying its precious cargo of young minds toward the Galactic Education Consortium's most prestigious academy. Among the passengers sat Zara Chan, her dark eyes fixed on the viewport, watching alien landscapes unfold beneath swirling purple clouds. At 17, she was the youngest human ever accepted to the Academy of Advanced Sciences, a fact that had earned her both admiration and resentment from her peers back on Earth. The Academy sprawled across a vast plateau, its crystalline spires reaching toward 3 moons that hung like jewels in the amber sky. Architecture from a dozen different species blended seamlessly, creating a structure that was both beautiful and intimidating. Zara pressed her palm against the cool glass, her heart racing with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. She had dreamed of this moment since she was 10 years old, when she had first solved a quantum mechanics problem that had stumped graduate students. The shuttle docked with barely a whisper, and Zara gathered her few belongings. Unlike many of her fellow passengers who dragged multiple cases of possessions, she carried only a single bag containing her clothes, a few precious books, and her mother's worn journal filled with engineering notes. The other students barely glanced at her as they disembarked, their attention focused on reuniting with friends or marveling at the alien architecture. Zara followed the stream of students through corridors lined with living walls that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. The academy housed beings from 47 different species, each bringing their unique perspective to the pursuit of knowledge. She passed groups of tall, ethereal Seraphians whose skin shimmered like oil on water, clusters of heavily built Chronari whose rock-like hide bore intricate carved patterns, and swift-moving Vextai whose multiple arms gestured in complex sign languages as they conversed. The dormitory assignments were posted on a holographic display that shifted between different languages and symbol systems. Zara found her name listed in Housing Block 7, Room 247. As she made her way through the maze-like corridors, she noticed the other students giving her curious looks. Some seemed merely interested, but others carried expressions of barely concealed disdain. She had expected this. Humans were still relatively new to the galactic community, having only made contact 60 years ago, and many species still considered them primitive. Room 247 was larger than she had expected, with 2 sleeping alcoves and a shared study area that overlooked one of the Academy's gardens. Her roommate was already there, a Chronari female named Fekkar whose gray skin bore the traditional learning patterns of her people. The carvings told the story of her academic achievements, each symbol representing a field of study mastered. "You must be the human," Fekkar said, her voice like rocks grinding together. She didn't look up from the complex mathematical equations she was inscribing on a stone tablet. "I have heard much about your species. They say humans learn quickly but lack the patience for true mastery." Zara set down her bag carefully. "I hope to prove that assumption wrong." Fekkar's laugh sounded like a landslide. "We shall see. I am studying hyperdimensional mathematics. My thesis explores the practical applications of folding spacetime for faster-than-light travel." "What is your field of study, human?" "Quantum engineering with a focus on energy manipulation," Zara replied. "I'm particularly interested in the theoretical frameworks for matter-energy conversion." For the first time, Fekkar looked up, her obsidian eyes reflecting genuine interest. "Ambitious. Most first-year students focus on basic principles. You believe you can grasp such advanced concepts?" "I've been working on some preliminary equations since I was 14, Zara said quietly. "My mother was an engineer before she died. She left me her research notes." Something in Zara's tone must have conveyed her sincerity, because Fekkar nodded slowly. "Perhaps there is more to humans than the stories suggest. I look forward to seeing your work." The first day of classes arrived with the ringing of crystalline chimes that echoed throughout the academy. Zara made her way to her first lecture, Advanced Quantum Theory, taught by Professor Vexnari, a Seraphian whose reputation for brilliance was matched only by his impatience with students he deemed unworthy. The lecture hall was a vast amphitheater with seats arranged in concentric circles around a central platform where complex equations and three-dimensional models could be projected directly into the air. Zara found a seat in the middle section, pulling out her tablet to take notes. Around her, students chatted in various languages, their voices creating a symphony of different tones and harmonics. She noticed a group of students in the front row who seemed to command particular attention. They were a mix of species, but all carried themselves with the confidence that came from privileged backgrounds and exceptional abilities. The leader of the group was a male Serathian named Kael'thas, whose silver skin seemed to glow with its own inner light. Beside him sat Voxterra, a Vextai female whose forearms moved in constant, graceful motion as she manipulated multiple data streams simultaneously. The third member was Thorak, a massive Chronari whose learning patterns were so extensive they covered not just his face but his entire visible body, marking him as a prodigy among his people. Professor Vexnari entered the hall with fluid grace, his form shifting slightly as he moved, a characteristic of his species when they were deep in thought. Welcome, students, to the study of the universe's most fundamental mysteries. Quantum theory is not merely an academic pursuit here. It is the foundation upon which all advanced technology in our galaxy is built. Those who master it become the architects of tomorrow. Those who do not. He paused, his luminous eyes scanning the assembled students. Find other pursuits. The lecture began with a review of basic principles, but quickly escalated to concepts that made Zara's head spin. Vexnari spoke of quantum entanglement networks that spanned entire star systems, of probability waves that could be manipulated to alter physical reality, of energy states that existed in dimensions beyond normal perception. Most of the students frantically scribbled notes, trying to keep up with the rapid-fire delivery of information. Zara found herself ahead of the curve, her mother's journal having covered many of these principles in her own unique notation. While others struggled with the mathematical frameworks, she was already seeing connections and possibilities that went beyond the professor's explanations. When Vexnari asked a particularly complex question about probability wave manipulation, she found herself raising her hand before she could stop herself. Yes, the human student? Vexnari's tone was neutral, but she could feel the attention of every other student in the hall focusing on her. Professor, when you describe probability wave collapse as a function of observation, are you referring to conscious observation specifically, or would any information gathering process suffice? Because if consciousness isn't required, then, theoretically, we could create automated systems that could manipulate quantum states without the uncertainty introduced by biological observers. The hall fell silent. Vexnari's form seemed to shimmer, a sign of intense thought among his people. That is, a sophisticated question. You understand that this touches on some of the most advanced theoretical frameworks in the field? Yes, sir. I've been working with some similar concepts in my personal research. Personal research? Kael'thas's voice carried a note of amusement that bordered on mockery. Humans have only been part of the galactic community for 60 years. What could you possibly know about quantum theory that we haven't already explored for millennia? Zara felt heat rise in her cheeks, but kept her voice steady. Perhaps a fresh perspective can sometimes reveal solutions that haven't been considered. Fresh perspective, Voxterra joined in, her forearms weaving dismissive patterns in the air. Or perhaps naive assumptions born of ignorance. Professor Vexnari held up a hand for silence. Miss Chen, I believe that was your name? Would you be willing to present your perspective at our next seminar? I find myself curious about these fresh approaches you mention. I would be honored, Professor. As the lecture continued, Zara became aware of the hostile stares from Kael'thas and his companions. She had inadvertently challenged their position as the class's intellectual elite, and, from their expressions, they were not pleased about it. When the lecture ended and students began filing out, she gathered her things quickly, hoping to avoid confrontation. She wasn't quick enough. Human, Kael'thas's voice stopped her at the door. She turned to find him and his companions blocking her path. Up close, his silver skin seemed to pulse with energy, and his eyes held depths that spoke of centuries of accumulated knowledge. A word. The corridor emptied around them as other students hurried past, clearly unwilling to get involved in whatever was about to unfold. Zara stood her ground, meeting his gaze despite the fact that he towered over her by nearly a foot. You made quite an impression in there, he continued, his tone conversational but with an undercurrent of something darker. Professor Vexnari actually seemed interested in what you had to say. That doesn't happen often.
I'm just here to learn, same as everyone else.
Thorak stepped forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over her.
Learning requires humility, human. It requires understanding one's place in the hierarchy of knowledge.
Your species has contributed nothing to galactic science.
You are students here by sufferance, not by right.
My species may be young to the galaxy, Zara replied carefully, but that doesn't mean we have nothing to offer. Voxtera's laugh was like the sound of wind chimes in a storm.
Offer? What could a species that has barely mastered fusion power offer to civilizations that have been manipulating the fundamental forces of reality for thousands of years? Maybe we see things differently because we haven't been looking at the same problems for thousands of years, Zara said.
Sometimes a different perspective is exactly what's needed to break through long-standing barriers.
Kael'thas moved closer, his presence becoming almost overwhelming.
Seraphians were known for their ability to project emotional states, and she could feel waves of condescension and subtle threat emanating from him.
Let me explain something to you, little human. This academy operates on a very specific hierarchy.
Those who have proven themselves through generations of achievement earn respect.
Those who have not, learn their place. And what exactly is my place supposed to be? Silent, Thorak rumbled. Grateful for the opportunity to observe your betters.
Accepting of the fact that some knowledge is beyond the grasp of primitive minds. Zara felt her anger building, but forced herself to remain calm.
I earned my place here just like everyone else. My test scores and research proposals were evaluated by the same standards. Test scores, Voxtera said dismissively. Academic exercises.
True understanding comes from centuries of cultural development, from being raised in traditions of learning that stretch back to the dawn of civilization.
Humans have no such traditions.
Your children playing with forces you can't truly comprehend. Then, I guess we'll see at the seminar, Zara said, pushing past them toward the door.
If human understanding is so primitive, you should have nothing to worry about.
Kael'thas' hand shot out, not touching her but creating a barrier of energy that made the air itself feel thick and oppressive.
Be very careful, human. The academy can be a dangerous place for those who don't know their limits. Accidents happen to students who overreach themselves.
The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Zara met his gaze one more time, seeing centuries of accumulated arrogance and prejudice staring back at her.
Thank you for the warning, she said quietly. I'll keep it in mind.
She walked away, feeling their eyes on her back until she turned the corner. Once she was alone, she allowed herself to tremble slightly. The confrontation had been more intense than she had expected, and the casual way they had threatened her was deeply unsettling. But, underneath the fear, she felt something else building. A determination that had been forged in the same fires that had driven her mother to pursue engineering despite being told that humans weren't suited for advanced technical fields. That evening, she sat in her room with her mother's journal open beside her tablet, working through the quantum equations that Professor Vexnari had presented. Thekar was at her own desk, carving new mathematical proofs into stone with precise, deliberate movements. The rhythmic scratching of her tools provided a steady background rhythm that helped Zara focus. I heard about your encounter with Kael'thas, Thekar said without looking up from her work.
Word travels fast around here. The academy is smaller than it appears. News of conflicts spreads quickly, especially when they involve species politics.
Thekar paused in her carving. Kael'thas and his companions have been the dominant force in advanced theoretical studies for the past 3 years. They are not accustomed to being challenged.
So I gathered. Any advice for dealing with them?
Prove them wrong, Thekar said simply. The Chronari have a saying, words are wind, but results are stone.
Show them that human understanding is more than they believe it to be. And, if I can't?
Then, you will learn humility, as they suggested.
But, I do not think that will be the case. Thekar turned to look at her, obsidian eyes reflecting the room's bioluminescent lighting.
Your work tonight, the equations you are manipulating, they are not standard approaches.
Where did you learn these techniques? Zara hesitated, then decided on honesty.
From my mother's research. She was working on theoretical frameworks for direct matter-energy conversion before she died. Most of her colleagues thought her approaches were too radical, too far removed from established theory.
May I see? Zara turned her tablet so Thekar could view the screen.
The Chronari studied the equations for several minutes, her expression growing increasingly thoughtful.
These are unusual.
The mathematical relationships she explored, they suggest possibilities that mainstream quantum theory considers impossible.
That's what everyone told her.
That's why her research was never published.
But, you believe she was correct?
I think she was onto something that others weren't ready to consider. Humans think differently about these problems because we haven't been told for thousands of years that certain things are impossible.
Sometimes ignorance can be an advantage. Thekkar's rumbling laugh filled the room.
Perhaps Kael'thas and his companions have more to worry about than they realize. The next few days passed in a blur of lectures, laboratory sessions, and increasingly complex assignments. Zara threw herself into her studies, not just to prove herself but because the material genuinely fascinated her. Each class revealed new layers of understanding about how the universe operated at its most fundamental levels. In applied quantum engineering, Professor Mordak, a Chronari whose learning patterns covered his entire body like a living textbook, demonstrated how quantum field manipulation could be used to create tools that existed in multiple probability states simultaneously. The students watched in awe as he reached into what appeared to be empty air and pulled out a cutting implement whose blade seemed to flicker between existing and not existing. The key, he explained, is understanding that at the quantum level, the distinction between real and theoretical becomes meaningless. A tool that exists in quantum superposition can interact with matter in ways that classical physics declares impossible.
Zara raised her hand. Professor, if we can create tools that exist in superposition, couldn't we theoretically create larger objects the same way?
Perhaps even structures or vehicles?
An interesting thought, Mordak replied.
However, the energy requirements for maintaining superposition increase exponentially with mass. Current theory suggests that anything larger than a few molecular clusters would require more energy than a star produces.
But, that assumes we're using current energy generation methods, Zara pressed. What if we could tap into zero-point energy fields directly, or use quantum entanglement to distribute energy requirements across multiple locations?
The professor's carved patterns seemed to shift, a sign of deep consideration among his people. You speak of theoretical frameworks that exist only in the most speculative research papers.
The practical applications would require breakthroughs in multiple fields simultaneously.
Yes, sir.
But, not necessarily impossible breakthroughs.
From the back of the classroom, she heard Voxtera's distinctive laugh. The human speaks of impossibilities as if they were merely inconveniences.
Perhaps someone should explain to her the difference between theoretical speculation and practical engineering. Zara turned to face her.
The difference between theoretical speculation and practical engineering is usually about 50 years and someone willing to try. The comment drew nervous laughter from some of the other students, but Voxtera's expression darkened.
After class, Zara wasn't surprised to find the trio waiting for her in the corridor again.
You seem determined to make a fool of yourself, Kael'thas said without preamble.
These grandiose statements about revolutionary breakthroughs, do you have any idea how many students have come through these halls making similar claims? Do you know what happened to them?
I assume they graduated and went on to contribute to their fields, Zara replied.
The ones who learned wisdom, yes, Thorak rumbled. The ones who persisted in their delusions found their academic careers ending rather abruptly. Are you threatening me again?
We're educating you, Voxtera said, her forearms weaving patterns of mock concern. The Academy has standards. Students who consistently promote ideas that are deemed disruptive to established learning paradigms find themselves re-evaluated.
Zara felt a chill run down her spine. Re-evaluated how? Academic review boards, Kael'thas explained with false sympathy.
Panels of professors who examine whether a student's approach to learning is compatible with the Academy's goals.
Students whose methods are judged to be detrimental to the learning environment can be asked to leave. Even if their academic performance is exemplary? Academic performance is about more than test scores, Thorak said. It includes cooperation, respect for established knowledge, and understanding one's place in the greater academic community. The threat was crystal clear now.
They weren't just trying to intimidate her, they were part of a system that actively suppressed ideas that challenged the established order.
Zara realized she was facing something far more dangerous than simple prejudice or academic rivalry.
She was up against an institutional structure designed to maintain the status quo and eliminate disruptive thinking.
I understand, she said quietly. Thank you for making the situation clear.
Good, Kael'thi smiled, but it was the smile of a predator that had cornered its prey.
We knew you would see reason.
Humans may be primitive, but you're not entirely stupid. As they walked away, Zara leaned against the wall, her mind racing. The challenge she faced was bigger than she had imagined. It wasn't enough to be brilliant or hardworking or even revolutionary in her thinking. She had to navigate a political and social structure that was actively hostile to new ideas, especially when those ideas came from a species considered inferior by the galactic community. But, as she thought about her mother's journal, about the years of ridicule and dismissal her mother had faced, about the revolutionary concepts that had been buried because they didn't fit established paradigms, she felt that familiar fire building in her chest. Her mother had been silenced, her work dismissed and forgotten. But Zara was here, at the most prestigious academy in the galaxy, with access to resources her mother could never have imagined. The seminar was in 3 days. Professor Vexnari had given her an opportunity to present her ideas to the most brilliant minds in her field. Kael'this and his companions expected her to fail, to be humiliated and retreat into the silent, grateful role they had defined for her species. They had made one critical error in their calculations. They had underestimated what it meant to be human. That night, Zara worked until the early hours of the morning, not just on her presentation but on something far more ambitious. Using her mother's notes as a starting point, she began developing a practical demonstration of quantum superposition engineering. If she could prove that human thinking could achieve what established theory claimed was impossible, she wouldn't just be defending her own academic future. She would be opening a door that could change the entire galaxy's understanding of what was possible. The equipment she needed was available in the Academy's advanced laboratories, but accessing it would require permissions that a first-year student wasn't normally granted. Fortunately, Thekkar's status as a senior student came with certain privileges, and her Chronari roommate had proven surprisingly willing to help. What you attempt is either brilliant or catastrophically foolish, Thekkar observed as she helped Zara requisition quantum field generators and probability wave manipulation devices.
Possibly both.
That's what they said about my mother's work too, Zara replied, adjusting the field alignment parameters according to equations that existed nowhere in standard textbooks.
The difference is, this time I have the resources to prove whether the theory works in practice. And, if it doesn't work? Then, I'll have learned something valuable about the limits of human understanding.
But, if it does work? If it does work, Thekkar finished, then everything changes.
The laboratory hummed with energy as Zara activated the quantum field generators.
According to her calculations, based on her mother's theoretical framework, she should be able to create a stable object in quantum superposition that could maintain its dual existence state for extended periods. Not just a molecular cluster or a simple tool, but something substantial. Something that would prove that human approaches to impossible problems might not be as impossible as everyone assumed. The equations scrolled across her display, each variable carefully calibrated according to principles that challenged the fundamental assumptions of established physics. As the field strength increased and the probability waves began to coherently interfere, Zara felt the same excitement her mother must have felt when she first glimpsed the mathematical relationships that everyone else had dismissed as impossible. In the quantum chamber before her, reality itself began to bend. The quantum chamber erupted in cascades of light as probability waves collapsed and reformed in patterns that defied conventional understanding. Zara watched through protective shields as her experiment took shape, her mother's theoretical framework translating into observable reality for the first time. The object materializing before her appeared to be a simple crystalline structure, but its surface flickered between states of existence, sometimes solid, sometimes translucent, sometimes appearing to exist in multiple locations simultaneously. Impossible, Thekar breathed, her carved patterns shifting rapidly as her emotional state changed. The energy readings, they're stable.
How are you maintaining coherence at this scale?
By not trying to control every variable, Zara explained, her hands dancing across the control interface as she fine-tuned the field parameters.
Traditional approaches try to force quantum states into predetermined patterns.
My mother's theory suggests that if you create the right environmental conditions, the quantum system will naturally evolve towards stable configurations.
You're allowing the quantum field to self-organize? More than that.
I'm encouraging it to explore multiple organizational states simultaneously and, then, selecting for the ones that maintain coherence.
It's like evolution, but at the quantum level.
The crystalline structure began to emit a soft harmonic resonance, its surface patterns shifting through configurations that seemed to follow mathematical principles beyond current understanding.
Zara checked her readings again, hardly believing what she was seeing.
Not only was the object maintaining superposition, but it was actually becoming more stable over time, as if the quantum system was learning how to exist in its impossible state.
Zara, Thekar said urgently, someone's coming.
The laboratory door burst open, revealing Kael'thas, Voxterra, and Thorak, followed by Professor Vexnari himself. The professor's luminous form seemed to pulse with barely contained energy as he took in the scene before him. Miss Chen, his voice carried a note of stern disapproval, you were not authorized to conduct unsupervised experiments in the Advanced Quantum Laboratory. I have proper supervision, Zara indicated Thekar, whose senior status technically allowed her to authorize laboratory access for junior students. That authorization does not extend to experimental procedures that could pose a danger to Academy facilities, Vexnari continued, but his gaze was fixed on the impossible object floating in the quantum chamber.
What exactly are you attempting here?
Kael'thas stepped forward, his silver skin rippling with anticipation.
Professor, we came as soon as we detected the unauthorized energy signatures.
We were concerned that the human student might be attempting something beyond her capabilities.
How thoughtful of you, Zara said dryly, recognizing the setup for what it was.
They had been monitoring her activities and had chosen this moment to expose her to maximum embarrassment and potential disciplinary action.
Shut down your experiment immediately, Voxterra commanded, her forearms weaving patterns of authority.
Before you damage expensive equipment or worse. I don't think that's necessary, Zara replied calmly.
The field parameters are well within safety limits, and the experiment is yielding valuable data. Valuable data? Thorak's laugh was like an avalanche. You've been conducting unauthorized experiments for what, 3 hours? What could you possibly have learned that generations of qualified researchers haven't already discovered? Professor Vexnari moved closer to the observation window, his expression unreadable. Miss Chen, explain to me what I'm observing in that chamber.
A stable quantum superposition object, Professor. It exists simultaneously in multiple probability states while maintaining coherent physical properties.
Impossible, Kael'thas interjected.
Quantum decoherence makes such sustained superposition impossible at macroscopic scales.
Every first-year student knows that.
Every first-year student knows that according to current theory, Zara corrected. But, current theory assumes certain limitations about how quantum systems can be organized and maintained.
Professor Vexnari's form shimmered more intensely. You claim to have overcome decoherence at this scale? Show me your theoretical framework.
Zara transferred her data to the laboratory's main display, revealing the complex mathematical relationships her mother had developed. The equations filled the air in three-dimensional holographic form, their interconnected variables creating a web of relationships that seemed to dance through conceptual space.
These equations, Vexnari studied them intently. Where did you acquire them?
They represent original research conducted by my mother before her death. She believed that quantum systems could be encouraged to self-organize into stable superposition states if the environmental parameters were carefully managed.
Your mother was a quantum theorist?
She was an engineer who refused to accept that certain things were impossible.
Voxtera's arms moved in dismissive patterns. Engineering approaches to pure theoretical problems rarely yield meaningful results.
This display proves nothing except that humans don't understand the difference between genuine breakthrough and elaborate failure.
Then, perhaps you could explain why my elaborate failure is currently maintaining stable superposition at a scale that your theoretical framework declares impossible? Zara asked.
Measurement error, Kael'thas said confidently.
Or equipment malfunction? Possibly both.
Feel free to verify the readings yourself, Zara gestured toward the control interface.
All sensor data is being recorded and cross-checked through multiple independent systems.
Professor Vexnari moved to the controls, his luminous fingers dancing across surfaces designed for multiple species physiologies.
For several minutes, he checked and rechecked the readings, his expression growing increasingly thoughtful.
The energy signatures are genuine, he announced finally. The object is indeed maintaining quantum superposition at a macroscopic scale.
But, that's impossible, Thorak rumbled, his confidence wavering for the first time. Clearly not, the professor replied.
The question is whether this represents a genuine theoretical breakthrough or a clever manipulation of existing principles that we haven't recognized.
Kael'thas stepped forward, his silver skin now pulsing with agitation. Professor, surely you don't believe that a first-year human student has made a discovery that has eluded our greatest minds for centuries?
What I believe, Vexnari said carefully, is that the evidence before us deserves serious examination regardless of its source.
He turned to Zara. Miss Chen, would you be willing to reproduce this experiment under controlled conditions with a full academic review panel present?
Of course, Professor.
And, would you be willing to submit your theoretical framework for peer review? I would be honored to. Voxtera's arms wove patterns of outrage. Professor, this is highly irregular. Experimental results should be verified by qualified researchers before any formal review process begins. An excellent point, Vexnari agreed. Mr. Kael'thas, since you and your colleagues seem particularly invested in this matter, would you be willing to serve as the verification team?
You could attempt to reproduce Miss Chen's results using her exact methodology.
Kael'thas's expression suggested that this was exactly what he had wanted to avoid.
Professor, I hardly think that we should be required to waste our valuable research time on
verifying experimental results that could represent a significant breakthrough in quantum engineering?
Vexnari's tone carried a subtle rebuke. I would think that students of your caliber would be eager to participate in such important work.
We would be delighted to assist, Thorak said quickly, shooting a warning glance at Kael'thas. When shall we begin? Tomorrow evening. I'll arrange for the full quantum engineering faculty to observe. Miss Chen, I trust you can reproduce your results?
Yes, sir.
The process is completely repeatable.
As the group prepared to leave, Kael'thas moved close to Zara, his voice dropping to a whisper that only she could hear.
You think you're clever, human, but you've just made a fatal error.
Tomorrow, in front of the entire faculty, we'll demonstrate that your precious breakthrough is nothing but smoke and mirrors. And, when we do, your academic career will be over before it truly begins.
I look forward to the demonstration, Zara replied quietly. It should be very educational for everyone involved. That night, Zara barely slept.
She went over her mother's equations again and again, checking every calculation, every variable, every theoretical assumption. The mathematics was sound, and her experimental results had been consistent across multiple trials.
But she knew that tomorrow's demonstration would be about more than just scientific validity. It would be a battle for the future of human participation in galactic academia.
Thekar worked beside her through the early morning hours, her stone carving tools creating a rhythmic counterpoint to Zara's frantic calculations.
You are concerned about tomorrow, the Chronari observed. I'm concerned about whether I'm missing something crucial. Kael'thas seemed very confident that they could prove my results were fraudulent. Perhaps they know something about the equipment that you do not.
Or perhaps they plan to sabotage your experiment in some way.
That's what I'm afraid of. But, I checked everything multiple times.
The theory is solid, the experimental design is sound,
and the results are reproducible. Then, trust in your work, Thekar said. The Chronari have another saying, stone does not lie, but those who read it poorly see falsehood where truth exists. Your results are stone. Let them try to prove otherwise. The next evening, the Advanced Quantum Laboratory was filled with the Academy's most distinguished faculty members. Professors from a dozen different species gathered around the observation area, their varied forms creating a tapestry of galactic intellectual diversity. Zara noticed several Nobel laureates, multiple recipients of the Galactic Science Prize, and at least 3 scientists whose work had revolutionized entire fields of study. Professor Vexnari called for order, his luminous presence commanding immediate attention. Colleagues, we are here to observe a demonstration of experimental quantum engineering that, if verified, could represent a significant advancement in our understanding of macroscopic quantum mechanics. Miss Chen, would you please explain your methodology? Zara stepped forward, feeling the weight of dozens of brilliant minds focused on her every word. Honored professors, my experiment is based on theoretical frameworks that suggest quantum systems can be encouraged to self-organize into stable superposition states through carefully managed environmental parameters. She began the demonstration, explaining each step of the process as she worked. The quantum field generators hummed to life, probability wave manipulators created standing interference patterns, and the environmental controls maintained precise conditions for quantum coherence. As before, the crystalline structure began to materialize in the chamber, its surface flickering between multiple states of existence. Fascinating, murmured Professor Kexley, a Vextai whose four-armed physiology allowed her to operate multiple analytical devices simultaneously. The energy patterns are unlike anything in current literature. Because they're impossible, Kael'thas interjected, stepping forward with his companions. Professor Vexnari, with your permission, we would like to examine the experimental setup more closely. By all means, Vexnari nodded. Scientific verification requires thorough examination. Kael'thas and his team moved to the control interfaces, their hands dancing across the displays as they checked readings and verified settings. Zara watched nervously, knowing that a single altered parameter could destabilize the entire system. The field generators are operating within normal parameters, Voxterra announced, her voice carrying a note of disappointment. Energy distribution appears consistent with the displayed readings, Thorak admitted reluctantly. However, Kael'thas said with renewed confidence, I believe I've identified the source of the apparent anomaly. He gestured toward one of the secondary control panels. Miss Chen, could you explain the function of this particular subsystem? Zara examined the panel he indicated. It controlled the laboratory's quantum isolation field, a standard safety feature that prevented experimental quantum effects from interfering with other areas of the Academy. That's the isolation field generator. It maintains a quantum barrier between the experimental chamber and the external environment. Exactly. And you'll notice that the isolation field is currently operating at significantly higher power levels than normal specifications require. A murmur ran through the assembled faculty as they examined the readings. Zara felt her heart sink as she realized where Kael'thas was leading. What Mr. Kael'thas is suggesting, Professor Mordak said gravely, is that the apparent quantum superposition effect is actually an artifact of isolation field interference rather than a genuine macroscopic quantum state. That would explain the impossible stability readings, added Professor Kexley. The isolation field could be masking normal decoherence effects, creating the appearance of sustained superposition. Zara stared at the readings in shock. The isolation field was indeed operating at higher than normal power levels, but that wasn't part of her experimental design. Someone had altered the settings, either to sabotage her experiment or to create exactly this situation. Miss Chen, Professor Vexnari's voice carried deep disappointment. Did you intentionally modify the isolation field parameters to create this effect? No, sir. I used standard isolation field settings throughout my experiment. Then, you were unaware that your results were artifacts of equipment interference rather than genuine quantum effects? Zara looked around the room, seeing doubt and disappointment in the faces of professors who had seemed impressed by her work just moments before. Kael'thas wore an expression of barely concealed triumph, while his companions looked appropriately grave about the discovery of her error. Professor, she said desperately, if you'll allow me to reset the isolation field to standard parameters, I can demonstrate that the effect persists without interference. I'm afraid that won't be necessary, Vexnari replied. The evidence is clear. What appeared to be a revolutionary breakthrough was actually the result of improper equipment calibration. This is precisely why experimental protocols exist, Miss Chen. Shortcuts and oversights lead to false results that waste everyone's time. But, sir, I never modified those settings. Someone else must have.
Miss Chen, Kael'thi said with false sympathy, making accusations when you've been caught in error only makes the situation worse. The honorable thing would be to acknowledge your mistake and learn from it. Zara felt the room closing in around her as professors began to disperse, their excitement replaced by the kind of embarrassed disappointment that followed scientific fraud or gross incompetence. She had been expertly maneuvered into a position where any protest would sound like desperate excuses from a failed student trying to avoid responsibility for her mistakes. Professor Vexnari, she tried one last time, if I could just demonstrate. That will be enough, Miss Chen. Report to my office tomorrow morning. We need to discuss your future at this academy. As the laboratory emptied, Zara stood alone beside her ruined experiment, the crystalline object in the quantum chamber flickering erratically as the sabotaged isolation field created interference patterns that destroyed any meaningful data. Fekkar remained behind, her obsidian eyes reflecting both sympathy and anger. They planned this from the beginning, the Chronari said quietly. The timing, the questions, the convenient discovery of the equipment malfunction. This was not chance. Of course it wasn't, Zara replied bitterly. I should have seen it coming. They warned me what would happen if I persisted with ideas that challenged the established order. What will you do now? Zara looked at the fractured light patterns in the quantum chamber, watching her dreams of proving human potential dissolve into chaos. But, underneath the disappointment and anger, something else was building. The same determination that had driven her mother to pursue impossible research despite years of ridicule and dismissal. The same stubborn refusal to accept limitations that had defined humanity's rapid rise from a primitive planetary civilization to participants in galactic society. I'm going to prove them wrong, she said quietly. Not just about my experiment, but about everything they believe about humans and our place in this galaxy. How? Your academic standing is severely damaged. Even if you avoid expulsion, your credibility is destroyed. Then, I'll rebuild it. But first, I need to understand exactly how they sabotaged my demonstration. And then. She paused, a plan beginning to form in her mind. Then, I'm going to give them a lesson in why it's dangerous to underestimate human determination. The next morning, Zara sat in Professor Vexnari's office, surrounded by floating displays showing her academic records, experimental data, and disciplinary history. The professor's luminous form seemed dimmer than usual, as if her failure had somehow diminished his own energy. Miss Chen, last night's events have placed me in a very difficult position. The Faculty Review Board is recommending immediate suspension pending a full investigation into your research methods. Professor, I maintain that my results were genuine and that the isolation field interference was not part of my original experimental design. Even if that were true, it would indicate a serious failure to properly monitor and control your experimental parameters. Such oversights are incompatible with the standards we maintain here. Then, let me prove it. Give me one more chance to demonstrate my results under completely controlled conditions. Vexnari's form shimmered with what might have been sympathy. Miss Chen, even if your theoretical framework has merit, the academic community has lost confidence in your ability to conduct reliable research. No respected journal would publish work associated with last night's debacle. So my academic career is over because of one sabotaged experiment? Your academic career is over because you attempted to present revolutionary claims without sufficient preparation or oversight. Whether the sabotage was deliberate or the result of your own oversight is irrelevant. The scientific community demands reliability above all else. Zara sat in silence for several moments, processing the implications of what he was saying. Not just her career, but her entire future and humanity's potential for making meaningful contributions to galactic science hung in the balance.
Professor, what if I could demonstrate my results not just in a laboratory setting, but in a real-world application? What if I could prove that my theoretical framework has practical value beyond academic theory? What do you mean? Give me 6 months. If I can develop a practical application of macroscopic quantum superposition that provides genuine utility, would the Academy reconsider its position? Vexnari's luminous form pulsed thoughtfully. You would need to produce something genuinely revolutionary.
Not just a laboratory curiosity, but a practical technology that advances the field significantly.
I understand.
And you would need to do this without Academy resources, since your access to advanced equipment is suspended pending the review board's final decision.
I understand that too. Very well.
You have 6 months to produce something remarkable. But, Miss Chen, if you fail, or if you attempt any kind of academic fraud, the consequences will extend beyond your own career.
The Academy's decision could affect the future admission of all human students.
Zara felt the weight of representing her entire species settling on her shoulders.
I won't let that happen, Professor.
As she left his office, she found Kael'thas waiting in the corridor, his silver skin glowing with satisfaction.
How did your meeting go, human? About as well as you expected, I'm sure.
I take no pleasure in seeing a fellow student fail, he said with obviously false concern. But perhaps this will serve as a valuable lesson about the importance of understanding one's limitations.
Oh, I've learned a lot about limitations, Zara replied.
Particularly about the limitations of people who think they can control knowledge through politics and intimidation.
Careful, Miss Chen. Your academic standing is already precarious. Accusations of improper behavior would only make things worse. I'm not making accusations. I'm making observations.
And here's another observation: you may have won this round, but the game is far from over. Kael'thas's expression hardened.
There is no game, human. There is only reality.
And the reality is that your species lacks the intellectual sophistication to make meaningful contributions to advanced science.
Last night's failure merely confirmed what we already knew. We'll see about that.
As Zara walked away, she heard Kael'thas call after her, 6 months, human. And then, you'll learn what real failure looks like. But he had made a critical error in his calculations. He had underestimated what it meant to forge human resolve in the fires of adversity.
Zara Chen was not just fighting for her own academic career anymore.
She was fighting for the future of human participation in the galaxy's greatest endeavor, the pursuit of knowledge that could transform reality itself. The battle had only just begun. 6 months later, the Kepler Station asteroid mining facility hung suspended in the void between two binary stars, its massive extraction arms dormant as engineers struggled with a problem that had defied solution for 3 months. The quantum resonance extractors that could harvest rare minerals from asteroids had suffered a cascade failure, leaving the station's 30,000 workers facing unemployment and, potentially stranded in deep space. Dr. Elena Vesquez, the station's chief engineer, floated in the zero-gravity observation deck, staring at diagnostic displays that showed the same impossible readings they had been showing for weeks. The quantum extraction systems existed in a state of chaotic superposition that made normal repairs impossible. Every attempt to restore normal operation had failed, and the Galactic Mining Consortium was considering abandoning the entire facility. Another consulting team has declared the problem unsolvable, her assistant reported through the communication system.
The Seraphian Quantum Engineering Institute says the quantum cascade cannot be reversed without completely rebuilding the extraction systems from scratch.
Which would cost more than the station is worth, Elena replied grimly.
How many teams have we consulted now? 17. The best quantum engineers from 8 different species.
They all reached the same conclusion: the extraction systems are locked in an impossible quantum state that prevents normal operation or shutdown. Elena closed her eyes, feeling the weight of responsibility for the thousands of workers whose livelihoods depended on finding a solution.
Are there any other options? Actually, there is one more consultant requesting permission to examine the systems. Someone from the Galactic Academy. Another professor with theoretical solutions that won't work in practice? No, ma'am. It's a student. A human named Zara Chen. Elena's eyes snapped open. A student? What could a student possibly offer that 17 teams of experts couldn't provide? She claims to have developed new approaches to quantum field manipulation that could stabilize the cascade. Her credentials show some unusual research into macroscopic quantum engineering. Elena laughed bitterly. Send her away. We don't have time for academic experiments.
Ma'am, with respect, we don't have any other options.
The consortium is pulling funding in 48 hours. If this human thinks she can help, fine. But I'm not wasting more than an hour on whatever theoretical nonsense she's peddling.
2 hours later, Elena found herself staring at a young human woman whose intense dark eyes seemed to see possibilities where everyone else saw only failure. Zara Chen moved through the damaged quantum extraction facility with the confidence of someone who understood the underlying principles better than the engineers who had built it. The cascade failure isn't actually a failure, Zara explained as she examined the diagnostic readouts. It's a natural response to quantum stress that the original designers didn't account for.
The extraction systems have evolved into a self-stabilizing superposition state. Self-stabilizing superposition is theoretical, Elena protested. It doesn't exist at macroscopic scales.
It does if you understand how to encourage quantum systems to organize themselves rather than trying to force them into predetermined patterns. Zara pulled up her own diagnostic equipment, devices that Elena didn't recognize but which seemed to interface seamlessly with the station's systems. Your engineers have been trying to collapse the superposition state back to normal operation, but that's fighting against the system's natural evolution.
So what do you suggest?
Work with the superposition instead of against it. If we can guide the quantum cascade into a stable configuration that includes normal extraction capabilities, we can restore function without destroying the evolved quantum structure.
Elena stared at the readings Zara's equipment was generating.
The patterns were unlike anything in standard engineering manuals, showing quantum relationships that seemed to dance through probability space in impossible ways.
This is completely outside established protocols. Established protocols couldn't solve your problem, Zara pointed out. Maybe it's time to try approaches that haven't been explored. And if your approach fails? Then, you're no worse off than you are now. But, if it succeeds?
Zara gestured toward the displays showing her analysis. Not only will we restore normal function, but the quantum extraction systems will operate at efficiency levels far beyond their original specifications.
Elena found herself caught between desperation and skepticism.
Everything about this young human's approach violated conventional engineering wisdom, but conventional wisdom had already failed spectacularly.
How long would your procedure take? 12 hours to implement the quantum field modifications, another 6 hours to verify stability.
We'll know if it's working within the first hour.
And the risks? No greater than abandoning the station entirely.
Elena made her decision with the same instinct that had made her a successful engineer. When safe approaches fail, sometimes you have to trust dangerous innovations.
You have 18 hours.
But I want full monitoring and abort protocols in place.
Understood.
As Zara began her work, Elena watched diagnostics that defied her understanding of quantum mechanics. Instead of forcing the chaotic superposition into collapse, the human engineer seemed to be teaching it how to organize itself into useful configurations. Quantum fields that had been locked in destructive interference patterns began to shift into coherent structures that maintained their impossible properties while allowing normal operation to resume.
How is this possible? Elena asked as the first extraction arm flickered back to life after 3 months of dormancy.
By accepting that quantum systems are more intelligent than we give them credit for, Zara replied, her hands moving across control interfaces with practiced precision. Instead of treating them like machines that need to be controlled, I treat them like living systems that need to be guided.
Quantum fields aren't alive. Aren't they? They respond to environmental changes, they evolve and adapt, they seek stable configurations.
The only difference between quantum intelligence and biological intelligence is complexity and timescale. Elena watched in fascination as more extraction systems came online, their operation smoother and more efficient than she had ever seen.
Your approach, it's completely revolutionary. It's also completely practical.
Revolutionary doesn't have to mean impractical if you understand the underlying principles correctly. By the end of 18 hours, Kepler station was operating at 147% of its original efficiency, with quantum extraction systems that had evolved beyond their original design parameters into something unprecedented in galactic mining history. The chaotic superposition that had threatened to destroy the facility had been transformed into a quantum enhancement that made it the most productive mining operation in known space. Elena stood in the observation deck, watching asteroid mining proceed with a grace and efficiency that seemed almost artistic.
Miss Chen, what you've accomplished here, it's going to revolutionize the entire industry.
That's the idea, Zara replied with a tired smile.
Sometimes revolution is the only way to solve impossible problems. Where did you learn to work with quantum systems this way?
From my mother's research, and from being told repeatedly that certain things were impossible. It turns out that impossible is often just another word for unexplored.
Elena turned to study the young woman more carefully. You're not just here to solve our technical problems, are you? This is about something bigger. This is about proving that human approaches to science deserve respect rather than dismissal. It's about showing that fresh perspectives can solve problems that established thinking cannot. And, have you proven that? We'll find out soon enough. 3 days later, Zara stood once again in Professor Vexnari's office, but this time she was not alone. Dr.
Elena Vasquez had accompanied her back to the academy, along with documented evidence of Kepler station's remarkable transformation. The floating displays now showed not just Zara's academic records, but also industrial reports, efficiency analyses, and testimonials from the galaxy's most prestigious engineering firms.
Miss Chen, Professor Vexnari's luminous form pulsed with what appeared to be barely contained excitement. The documentation Dr. Vasquez has provided is quite extraordinary.
A 147% increase in operational efficiency using techniques that don't exist in any standard textbook.
The techniques exist, Zara corrected gently. They just haven't been recognized as valid by academic institutions.
Because they contradicted established theory. Because they required thinking about quantum systems in ways that challenged fundamental assumptions about how reality operates.
Professor Vexnari studied the technical reports more closely.
Your quantum field manipulation techniques, they suggest that macroscopic superposition is not only possible but practically useful.
That was always the potential.
The question was whether the academic community would be willing to examine evidence that contradicted their preconceptions.
And, now?
Zara smiled, thinking about the past 6 months of intense research and development conducted in improvised laboratories using equipment she had built herself from salvaged components. Now we have proof that human approaches to impossible problems can yield results that benefit the entire galactic community. The office door opened to admit several faculty members, including Professor Mordak and Professor Kexley, both of whom had been present at her disastrous demonstration 6 months earlier. Their expressions suggested that they had already reviewed the reports from Kepler station.
Miss Chen, Professor Mordak said gravely, the Faculty Review Board has met to discuss your case in light of recent developments.
And their decision?
Your suspension is hereby lifted, effective immediately.
Furthermore, the Academy would like to offer you accelerated advancement to advanced graduate status, with full access to research facilities and a substantial budget for continued development of your quantum engineering techniques. Zara felt a surge of triumph, but kept her expression carefully neutral. I appreciate the Academy's recognition, but I have some conditions.
Professor Kexley's forearms moved in patterns of surprise. Conditions? Miss Chen, you're hardly in a position to make demands.
I think recent events suggest that I'm in exactly the position to make demands, Zara replied calmly.
My conditions are simple.
First, I want a formal investigation into the sabotage of my original demonstration, with appropriate consequences for those responsible.
That may not be possible, Professor Vexnari said carefully. proving deliberate interference versus accidental equipment malfunction would require.
I have security recordings from the laboratory showing unauthorized access to control systems during the preparation period, Zara interrupted.
I've had 6 months to gather evidence.
The professors exchanged glances, their expressions suggesting that this was not entirely unexpected news. Second, Zara continued, I want the Academy to establish a new research program focused on developing unconventional approaches to established problems, with specific protection for students whose work challenges existing paradigms. Such a program would be highly irregular, Professor Mordak observed. So was sabotaging a student's research because it threatened the academic status quo.
Irregularity seems to be the norm around here. And, your third condition? Professor Vexnari asked.
I want Kael'thas, Voxterra, and Thorak to publicly acknowledge the validity of my research and issue formal apologies for their attempts to suppress it.
Miss Chen, a familiar voice said from the doorway, that won't be necessary.
Zara turned to see Kael'thas entering the office, his silver skin no longer glowing with arrogant confidence but dim with what appeared to be genuine humility. Behind him came Voxterra and Thorak, their own expressions reflecting similar changes in attitude.
Kael'thas, Professor Vexnari seemed genuinely surprised. I wasn't expecting you.
Professor, we came to formally request the opportunity to apologize to Miss Chen for our behavior. Kael'thas faced Zara directly, his luminous eyes meeting hers without the contempt she remembered.
Miss Chen, we were wrong.
Not just about your research, but about our entire approach to knowledge and learning.
What changed your minds? The reports from Kepler Station, Voxterra answered, her forearms moving in patterns of contrition.
When we realized that our prejudices had nearly prevented a breakthrough that benefited thousands of people, we were forced to confront some uncomfortable truths about ourselves. We have spent so long defending established knowledge that we forgot the purpose of education, Thorak rumbled, his carved patterns seeming somehow subdued.
We became gatekeepers instead of explorers.
Kael'thas stepped closer, his voice carrying genuine emotion.
Miss Chen, we don't just apologize for our actions against you personally. We apologize for representing everything wrong with academic elitism and species prejudice. You have shown us what intellectual courage actually looks like. Zara studied their faces, seeing what appeared to be genuine transformation rather than calculated political maneuvering. Apology accepted. But, I hope you understand that this isn't just about me.
It's about creating an environment where revolutionary thinking can flourish regardless of its source.
We understand, Voxterra said. In fact, we would like to request permission to collaborate on your research program. We believe our combined perspectives could yield even more remarkable results. Former rivals becoming allies? Zara smiled. That would be revolutionary in its own right. Professor Vexnari's form pulsed with what was clearly satisfaction. Miss Chen, it appears that your impact on this institution extends far beyond quantum engineering.
You have reminded us all why we pursue knowledge in the first place. To serve the greater good rather than personal aggrandizement, Professor Mordak agreed.
Your mother would be proud.
Zara felt a warm glow at the mention of her mother, thinking about the journal full of revolutionary ideas that had been dismissed and forgotten until now. She always believed that impossible was just another word for opportunity. I'm glad I finally had the chance to prove her right. 6 months later, the Academy of Advanced Sciences had become a very different place. The new Institute for Revolutionary Research occupied an entire wing of the complex, with laboratories equipped to test the most unconventional theories and protect researchers whose work challenged established paradigms. Students from across the galaxy came specifically to participate in programs that encouraged them to question fundamental assumptions and explore impossible possibilities. Zara stood in the Institute's main laboratory, watching as Kael'thas, Voxterra, and Thorak worked alongside human students and researchers from dozens of other species. The quantum engineering techniques she had developed were being refined and expanded, leading to breakthroughs in fields ranging from faster-than-light communication to medical technology that could repair genetic damage at the quantum level. The latest reports from the Industrial Applications Division, Thekkar announced as she entered the laboratory, her carved patterns now including symbols representing the new research methodologies they had developed together. 17 major corporations are implementing variations of your quantum optimization techniques.
Efficiency improvements range from 23% to 200% depending on the application. Any new theoretical developments? Professor Vexnari believes we're on the verge of discovering practical applications for temporal quantum mechanics. If his calculations are correct, we might be able to create technology that exists across multiple timeframes simultaneously. Zara shook her head in amazement.
A year ago, they were ready to expel me for suggesting that macroscopic superposition was possible.
Now we're talking about temporal engineering.
That's what happens when you change the fundamental paradigm, Kael'thas said as he joined their conversation. Once you prove that established limitations aren't absolute, every impossible becomes merely improbable. And every improbable becomes a research opportunity, Voxterra added, her forearms weaving patterns of enthusiasm as she gestured toward the experiments proceeding throughout the laboratory. Thorak looked up from a crystalline structure that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously.
The Chronari Council has formally requested human consultants for their next major engineering project.
They want to apply your quantum optimization techniques to planetary engineering.
Terraforming entire worlds using quantum superposition? Zara asked. Why not? If you can optimize mining operations by teaching quantum systems to organize themselves, why couldn't you optimize planetary atmospheres the same way?
Zara considered the implications, thinking about the chain of events that had begun with classroom humiliation and led to revolutionary changes in how the galaxy approached impossible problems. Her mother's discredited theories had become the foundation for technologies that were transforming civilization itself. There is one thing I want to know, she said to Kael'thas and his former companions. Why did you really try to sabotage my research? Was it just species prejudice, or something deeper? Kael'thas's luminous skin dimmed slightly with embarrassment. It was fear, if I'm being completely honest. We had built our entire identities around being the Academy's intellectual elite. When you demonstrated capabilities that challenged our position, we saw it as an existential threat rather than an opportunity for collaboration. We confused protecting our status with protecting knowledge itself, Voxterra admitted. We thought that if humans could make breakthrough discoveries, it somehow diminished our own achievements. But knowledge isn't diminished by sharing, Thorak observed. It's multiplied. Your success has opened research avenues that none of us could have explored alone. That's the most important lesson in all of this, Zara agreed. Revolutionary thinking doesn't replace established knowledge, it transforms it into something greater than anyone imagined possible. She walked to the main observation window, looking out at the alien landscape where dozens of species worked together on projects that would have been considered impossible just a few years earlier. Students who had once competed for academic dominance now collaborated on research that could reshape the galaxy's understanding of reality itself. The communication system chimed with an incoming priority message from Earth. Zara activated the display to see the face of Dr. Sarah Chan, her cousin and one of humanity's leading advocates for expanded participation in galactic society. Zara, I have news that I thought you should hear directly. The Galactic Council has approved humanity's application for advanced membership status. Effective immediately, humans will have full voting rights on all scientific and educational initiatives. What changed their minds? The revolution you started at the Academy. When the most prestigious educational institution in the galaxy not only accepts but actively promotes human approaches to problem solving, it sends a message that our species has genuine contributions to make. Zara felt tears forming in her eyes as she thought about how far humanity had come from being considered primitive newcomers to the galactic community. My mother would have loved to see this day. She did see it, in a way. Every equation in her journal, every revolutionary concept she developed despite being told it was impossible, led directly to this moment. Her work lives on in everything you've accomplished. After ending the call, Zara remained at the window, thinking about the journey that had brought her to this point. A year ago, she had been a humiliated student facing expulsion for challenging established paradigms. Now she stood at the center of a scientific revolution that was transforming how the galaxy approached the pursuit of knowledge. Having philosophical moments?
Thekar asked as she approached with a new mathematical proof carved into stone.
Thinking about how much has changed.
And how much my mother's work contributed to all of this.
She would be proud not just of your scientific achievements, but of your courage in defending them against those who try to suppress them.
It wasn't really courage. It was stubbornness. Human stubbornness. Perhaps that's what the galaxy needed.
Someone too stubborn to accept that certain things were impossible. Zara laughed, remembering her confrontations with Kael'thas and his companions, the sabotage demonstration, the months of desperate research conducted in improvised laboratories. I suppose there's something to be said for refusing to know when you're beaten.
Indeed. And, now we keep pushing boundaries. We keep asking why certain things are considered impossible. We keep proving that fresh perspectives can solve problems that established thinking cannot. Even if it means making more enemies? Especially if it means making more enemies.
Revolution is never comfortable for those who benefit from the status quo. As evening approached and the alien suns began to set over the Academy's spires, Zara made her way back to her new laboratory, where quantum experiments that would have been deemed impossible were now routine occurrences. She opened her mother's journal one more time, reading the words that had started it all: the greatest enemy of knowledge is not ignorance, but the illusion that we have already learned everything worth knowing. True discovery requires the courage to question not just what we don't understand, but what we think we understand completely. Her mother had been silenced by a scientific community that feared revolutionary thinking. But her daughter had proved that revolutionary thinking could not be stopped, only delayed. The battle against intellectual complacency was eternal, but it was a battle worth fighting. Zara Chen had learned that resolve, once forged in the fires of adversity, could become an unstoppable force for positive change. The classroom tormentors who had tried to crush her spirit had instead created something far more dangerous to the status quo, a human who refused to accept limitations and had the skills to prove that refusal was justified. The galaxy would never be the same. And that was exactly as it should be.